Well, we're joined now by Nwanze, who is the managing editor of Y Magazine. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Good morning.
Well, yes, we also did highlight how different parts of the country commemorating the Independence Day. Let's get your perspective, because, I mean, on this day, it was different strokes for different folks, really. Yes, the president gave a speech and different analysis and perspectives in terms of what Nigerians think, where we should be, where we currently are, what is being done. What do you think?
That's a complicated question. There are 170 million Nigerians, and different people see independence, or our so-called independence, according to some, in different directions or different ways. You have a lot of people, and this struck me yesterday. A lot of people actually went out to work yesterday. Those who own small businesses, and that's a message they are giving, without saying anything, that they live day to day. So whatever economic progress we want to beat our chest about has clearly not delivered to these people. Because if they fail to work on this given day, then they have a problem. That is the real story of Nigeria. It's not about the stories we hear at conferences and all of that, but what has the country delivered to its people, the man on the streets. And sadly, it hasn't yet delivered. In my place, I didn't have power almost the whole day. That's a problem. Yes, there have been some reforms. There have been a lot of paper things, but I think the president didn't touch on the most important issue in his speech, which is the assault on the judiciary. We cannot have a thriving democracy if we don't have a free and independent judiciary. And what's happening in Ekiti State now is going to be a measure of how our judiciary gets its independence. Yesterday, the Chief Justice wrote to every state's governor asking that they should implement fiscal independence for the judiciary. Whether that will happen remains to be seen, but it's an extremely important little incident that we must all keep an eye on.
But doesn't the judiciary have this self-regulating mechanisms? And so what about those who will interpret it if the president were to speak in it as though, wait a minute, there are separations of power here, and so if they've got how they cleanse themselves?
I think the least he could have done should have been at least to acknowledge it, because it's too important to be ignored. It's too vital for our democracy. It's what we are looking at here is an existential threat to our democracy. So we cannot wish it away, neither can we pretend that it's not happening. It must be faced head-on. A situation where judges start to cower in fear means that the entire structure on which our democracy is built will not last, cannot last.
No, but taking a look, at this speech, for you, the most important part was yet to be touched. But it would seem that there has been a theme. It's been running through, most Independence and Democracy Day speeches in the last couple of years, which is the one bordering on security. How do you think we're doing in that particular area?
Well, I would like to give kudos to the military, because the fact is, and I've said this in so many places, despite all of the negative reports or the alarmist reports that we hear, they're actually doing a decent job. Note that many of these people have not been properly trained, have not been properly equipped. It's only in the last few weeks that the scale of this thing, since Boko Haram changed tactics and started trying to do land grabs, I think that's when people actually began to realize how serious this thing really is. And then people began to take it seriously. So the fact that they held their own preceding that actually says a lot about them. Also, we must understand that fighting an insurgency is not a one-day thing. The truth is, insurgencies take a long time to defeat. And in most cases, you probably have to come to a negotiated settlement. The first example that springs to mind is the troubles in Northern Ireland. At the end of the day, the might of the British military still had to come to a negotiated political settlement. So, have we properly identified what feeds this whole Boko Haram thing? And have we started making long-term plans to take care of all of that? Because Boko Haram is not just a Northeast Nigeria problem. It's a Southwest Nigeria problem as well, because a lot of the things that feed into Boko Haram, or that feeds what causes Boko Haram, are existent in all parts of the country. massive unemployment, massive poverty. When you have those two in tandem, you'll find that people tend to listen more to extremists. But when people have a hope for the future, then people will be less likely to listen to extremists. So we can't keep beating our chest about 2.5 million jobs created when we cannot see the jobs. And on the other hand, we can see people being recruited into these kind of organizations. It may be Boko Haram today, who knows what it will be tomorrow. So we need to tackle the underlying root causes genuinely. And
you know, some people will say that, you know, what we're reaping now were seeds that were sown earlier.
a lot earlier.
A lot earlier, and as such, that's what we have to do, is the effect that we're seeing right now.
Yes.
2.5 million jobs in 2 years. I mean, it might be a drop in the ocean, but it's some effort. Do you see us?
But then the question is it real?
You're asking questions,
Yes.
you know, very searching questions. But from the efforts you can see on the ground, do you think that we're really addressing the issue?
I think I've said already that the biggest issue is the judicial issue. Because if people don't get appropriate justice, if justice is not served properly, if people don't get punished for infractions, then it doesn't matter how much money you throw at a problem. Someone somewhere will be waiting to guzzle that money or whatever effort, knowing that he will get away with what he's doing. That's one. Number two, I have my quarrels with the job figures. For example, earlier in the year, the Minister of Finance announced that they've created 1.6 million jobs, and then turned around to tell us that a good percentage of them, was it 56%, were in the informal sector. What is an informal sector job? How do you tell me you've created jobs in the informal sector? It doesn't work for me. That figure does not add up. So if we extrapolate 2.5 million jobs created over the last 2 years, how many of these jobs are in the informal sector? Because for me, an informal sector job is not a job.
How do you mean? What is an informal sector for you in the very first instance?
The woman who is selling gala on the road, that's informal sector. She's not taxed. The informal sector is defined as a sector that's not taxed, not documented. That's not a job in the real sense of it.
But I mean, it's something that we cannot. Maybe that's taking it a little simplistic. I do remember that the president once in his media chats was talking about the effect, the ripple effect that, you know, for instance, a job at a construction site could have on an economy around that particular area.
Yes.
The woman who's selling food, you know, these are all things that would happen as a result of work in a particular area. But, you know, we cannot discount them as not being jobs, can we?
We can't discount them, but we must look long term. That job is dependent on the fact that there's construction happening right now. What happens when the construction is done? She packs up and goes. What happens then?
But even construction workers always have temporary jobs as well.
And they move on to the next site. So we'll have construction finishes in Shagamu, and then they move to Ijebu. They create informal jobs for people in Ijebu, while the people in Shagamu go back to being unemployed.
But what's your general overview? I mean, how would you say that young people have fared? I want to take your perspective now. Do you still think that, are we yearning for something that we cannot get, or is it within our grasp?
That's it. Basically, there are things that young people can get. But one of the things that we really need as young people in this country are the right conditions. Everybody talks about how Nigeria is a nation of entrepreneurs, but the conditions are not right on the ground for entrepreneurs to thrive and flourish. For example, we have the power situation. I must admit that something appears to be being done about power. In my own area, even though power has been bad recently, there has been an improvement. It was worse before. Then there's access to finance. The fact is that most people can't start real businesses that employ real people without financing. And when you have a situation where you approach Bank XYZ in Nigeria and they tell you, oh, okay, we'll give you this loan, if they do, at 24% premium, then you already have a problem. So we need a situation where the conditions are created for young people to flourish, because SMEs are the backbone of any economy. We always like quoting the US. In the last US census, 89% of jobs were created by SMEs. What percentage of jobs do SMEs create in Nigeria? Nobody has that figure. Again, that's one of our big problems. Data. We don't have reliable data in Nigeria. So we need reliable data so that we can actually start to plan properly.